Now that we have all of our devices listed, we can proceed to start setting them up for firmware updates. We will set up a TS1070 in this example. We can choose the firmware version, select whether or not to have that device updated, and enter its username and password. The firmware choices available are determined based on the manifest that was downloaded when the application was first launched. The firmware versions found will match the Crestron FTP site and the Crestron website. Some devices will have a cloud indicator by them and some will not. If there is no cloud indicator, that means that the particular device firmware was found in the firmware files directory that was designated at the beginning when you first launched the application. If a firmware file that was provided by the Crestron Advanced Technical Support Group as a pre-release is placed in the same firmware files directory, it will show up in this drop-down list for that particular device. Once the device is chosen, you can check the box to specify that the device should be updated. The Select Firmware tab will show what version was selected in comparison to the version shown on the current and available firmware columns. To view the release notes, select the associated release notes button for that particular firmware file. You can edit and set up each one of these devices individually. If you only want to add this particular device for firmware update, you can set it up here. Select the connection type. In this particular case, SSH is the only option. This will depend on your device. We will leave it at the default port that it uses for SSH. If you want to set up an entire group, you can expand that group. Select Edit Group, set up the username and password for that group, and choose whether or not you want to change the connection type. Leaving this setting at default is best practice. That way, it will use the default connection method for all those devices within the group. You can enter in a custom port if needed. Choose the available firmware for that particular group. If you want them all to be set on the same firmware version, select the firmware version and select the Set option. The same option is available for the username, password, and other options. Press Submit to save the changes. To edit all devices, select the option here and enter the username, password, connection type, and port. Since we have multiple different device types and models selected, we can choose the Set All Firmware to Latest Version option instead of designating a specific file. Once we press Submit, each device will utilize the same username and password without manually entering it. They also have the latest version of the firmware that was in the drop-down box and are all set to update. Another benefit of the firmware update tool is that individual devices, such as an RF receiver or a Crestron control system, can scan and select connected or child devices. In this example, we are using a CEN GWEXER using SSL as the connection type, since CTP and SSL are the only options available on that specific device. If you select the Scan button, it will attempt to check the credentials. Press the Continue button to log in. The tool will first verify whether the device is in the first boot mode, meaning that it never had its credentials set, or whether it already has a username and password configured. In this example, the credentials are being reported as invalid. This is because this particular RF device does not use SSL, it uses only CTP. Because of this, we see the invalid symbol here. If we change it to CTP, it will remove the username and password boxes. If we scan again, it will locate all of the RF devices that are connected to the RF gateway. You can either select individual firmware for the devices that you want to update or downgrade, or you can choose to set all of them to the latest version. If you only want to update certain devices, you can check the box for those devices only. To update all devices on the latest, check the appropriate option. The same process applies to Crestron processors. Click the Scan Devices under the CrestNet section. In this example, the credentials are being reported as invalid. This is because this particular RF device does not use SSL, it uses only CTP. Because of this, we see the invalid symbol here. Once everything is configured and ready to update, use the Next button on the top right. When this button is pressed, a credential check will be performed on each device. We can see here that one of the panels has been flagged as being part of a Microsoft Teams video system. Because of that, the Crestron Flex UC engine will manage the firmware updates using Windows Update. The Firmware Update tool will remove that device from the list. If we press Cancel and go back and look at the list, we can see that that particular panel has been flagged in blue with a little icon to let us know that we cannot update it using this tool.